Most of you have known our family for a long time. You've seen the big house through the good years and the hard ones. But what happened this past Tuesday at 300 a.m. is something I never thought I'd have to address. As I'm recording this, my sister Jana is hundreds of miles away from Arkansas, sitting in a quiet, isolated farmhouse in Nebraska. People are asking why. They're asking why she packed her bags in the middle of the night without a formal goodbye. Why was there so much fear in her eyes as she pulled out of the driveway for the last time? Everyone on social media thinks this is just a new chapter, but the truth is much darker than a simple move. Today, I'm going to tell you about the security footage that changed everything. I'm going to share the contents of the final phone call that forced Jana to leave the only home she's ever known. What you've seen online is only the surface. The real story starts right now. It was 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. I couldn't sleep because my youngest was restless. So I walked down to the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I passed the hallway leading to Jana's room, I noticed something strange. Her door was wide open. Jana is the most private person I know. She never leaves her door open, especially at night. I peeked in, thinking she might be awake, but the room was freezing. The window was cracked open, and the curtains were fluttering in the Arkansas wind, but it wasn't just the cold, it was the silence. That room, which was always filled with her plants, her sewing projects, and her personal touch, felt hollow. I turned on the light, and my heart dropped. The bed was made perfectly, but her suitcases were gone. Her closet was half empty. On her nightstand, there was no note, no explanation, just her old Bible and a single, unlit candle. I walked over to the window and looked out into the driveway. Her car was gone. I remember standing there shivering, feeling this overwhelming sense of dread. Jana doesn't just leave. She is the glue of this family. She takes care of everyone. For her to disappear in the dead of night without a word to Mom or Dad, I knew something was wrong. I ran to the security monitor in the hallway, the one Dad installed years ago, and rewound the footage to 4:05 a.m. What I saw on that screen chilled me to the bone. Jana wasn't just packing, she was rushing. She looked over her shoulder 3 times before closing her trunk. And just before she got into the driver's seat, she looked directly at the camera. She didn't look angry. She looked terrified. Like she was running from something or someone inside the house. That was the moment I realized the Jana we knew was gone. And the secrets of the big house had finally pushed her over the edge. After finding Jana's room empty at 300 a.m., my mind was racing. I couldn't just sit in the house. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. It was freezing, and the dew was heavy on the grass. My feet instinctively led me to the one place where Jana spent most of her time, the greenhouse. To everyone else, that greenhouse was just a place where she grew tomatoes and exotic flowers. But to Jana, it was her sanctuary. It was the only place in the big house where she wasn't being watched by a dozen cameras or a dozen siblings. As I stepped inside, the smell of damp earth and blooming jasmine hit me. It felt like her. I started looking around, not even knowing what I was searching for. I checked her potting bench, her seed packets, even the soil in the large terracotta pots. And then I saw it. Tucked underneath a heavy tray of winter seedlings was a small, waterproof plastic bag. Inside was a single envelope. It wasn't a store-bought envelope. It looked old, slightly yellowed at the edges. With trembling hands, I opened the bag and pulled out the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Jana's, neat, precise, but you could see where the pen had pressed hard into the paper, as if she were writing with a heavy heart. The letter wasn't addressed to Mom or Dad. At the top, it simply said, "To the sister who finds this first." My breath caught in my throat. She knew I would come looking for her. As I read the words, the reality of her life for the past year started to unravel. She wrote about the quiet agreements she was forced to sign. She wrote about the family meetings that were actually interrogations. But the most shocking part was a specific date she mentioned from 6 months ago, a date when a high-profile legal team had visited the house. Jana wrote, "They told me that my silence was the price of our family's peace. They said that if I ever spoke about what I saw in the accounting ledgers, or what I heard in the hallway back in 2015, I would lose everything. Jessa, I can't breathe here anymore. Every flower I plant feels like I'm burying another secret." I stood there in the dark greenhouse, the flashlight shaking in my hand. This wasn't just about a sister wanting a new life or a husband. This was about a woman who had discovered a financial or personal truth that the gatekeepers were willing to destroy her for. Underneath the letter, There was a small map, a hand-drawn route leading away from Arkansas, skipping all the major highways. At the very bottom, she had scribbled a phone number with a Nebraska area code and a single word, a trust. I realized then that Jana hadn't just snapped. She had been a spy in her own home, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment to disappear. The greenhouse wasn't just a garden, it was her command center. And as I tucked that letter into my pocket, I knew that if Dad or the family advisors found out I had this, I would be next in line for their quiet agreements. I had to find her before they did. After finding that letter in the greenhouse, my heart was racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. I knew Jana could have planned this entire escape alone, moving state lines, securing a home. And disappearing at 300 a.m. required a level of coordination that Jana, in her sheltered life at the big house, just didn't have. I went back inside, my hands shaking, and I found her old iPad, the one she used for her business. I knew she had moved everything to her new phone. But I prayed she had forgotten to sign out of her cloud account on this one. I managed to bypass the lock screen. It was still the same 4 digits she'd used for years, and went straight to her message history. There were hundreds of threads from our family groups, but I was looking for something else, something hidden. That's when I saw a contact at the very bottom with no name. It was just a single blue heart emoji. As I opened that thread, the air felt like it left the room. The messages started back in July. The first one was simple, "Are you ready?" And Jana's reply sent chills down my spine. I can't do this anymore. I have to get out before the next contract is signed. I scrolled further, seeing GPS pins for a location in Nebraska and photos of a weathered farmhouse. But the real shock came when I tapped on the contact details to see the number behind that blue heart. Before I even dialed it, I recognized the digits. It was Jill. I sat there in the dark, stunned Jill and Jana. My 2 sisters who the world thought were on opposite sides of a family war. For years, Dad had told us that Jill was a danger to our values, that her path was one of bitterness. But looking at these messages, I realized Jill wasn't the enemy, she was Jana's lifeline. The messages revealed a 6-month-long operation. They used a code language that not even our producers or our parents would understand. Jill had written, "Jana, the way they are controlling your finances and your future, it has to stop. I've secured the place in Nebraska. No one will look for you there. You just have to be brave enough to drive through the gates one last time." But why was Jill doing this? At the very end of the thread, Jill had sent a photo of a legal document from our family's private archives, something from back in 2015. Jill's caption read, "They think they buried the truth with the show's cancellation, but you have the key now. Once you're safe, we tell the world what really happened." I realized then that Jana's departure wasn't just about finding peace, it was a coordinated strike. She and Jill had formed a secret alliance to expose something that could dismantle the very foundation of the Duggar image. Just as I was about to close the iPad, a new notification popped up on the screen. It was a message from Jill, sent just seconds ago. "Jessa, I know you're reading this. Please don't try to stop her." For once, I let her be free. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Jill knew I would find the iPad. She knew I was standing at a crossroads. I had to decide right then. Do I tell Dad and stop them, or do I become the 3rd sister in this secret rebellion? After the shock of seeing Jill's name on that iPad, one question kept me awake as the sun began to rise over the Arkansas hills. Why Nebraska? Our family has deep roots here in the South. We have land in Texas, friends in Tennessee, and history in Oklahoma. But Nebraska was always just a pass-through state for us, a place of endless cornfields and empty highways. It made no sense for Jana, a woman who loves her established gardens and her community, to flee to the middle of the Midwest. I spent the next hour in Dad's private office. I knew the risks. There are sensors on the door and cameras in the hall, but I had to find the why. I began digging through the heavy oak filing cabinets, looking for anything related to out-of-state holdings. That's when I found a dusty blue folder labeled 1994 Acquisitions. Inside, tucked behind old tax returns and building permits, was a deed for a small 40-acre plot of land near a town called Valentine, Nebraska. But the name on the deed wasn't Jim Bob Duggar. It wasn't any of my brothers. It was in the name of our late grandmother, Grandma Mary. As I read through the documents, I realized this wasn't just a random investment. This was the property Grandma Mary had inherited from her side of the family years before the show ever started. It was a place she had kept entirely off the grid. None of the Gatekeepers or the family advisors even knew it existed because it was never rolled into the family trust. On the back of the original land survey, there was a handwritten note in Grandma Mary's elegant, shaky script. It was addressed to Jana. It said, "For my quiet girl, when the world becomes too loud and the cameras feel like cages, remember the farmhouse in Valentine. It is the only earth we own that doesn't belong to the public. It is yours, Jana, always." My eyes filled with tears. Grandma Mary had seen the future. Even back then, she knew that one day, one of us would need a place to disappear. She had chosen Jana to be the keeper of that secret sanctuary. But as I looked deeper into the folder, I found a more recent document, a property tax notice from just 3 months ago. It had been paid by a private LLC registered in Nebraska. The name of the LLC, the Glass Greenhouse. Jana hadn't just run away in a moment of panic. She had been working with Jill for nearly a year to restore that old farmhouse, to move her life there piece by piece, and to settle Grandma Mary's estate in secret. They had been building a fortress of solitude right under our noses. I looked out the office window at the sprawling big house estate. To the world, this was a symbol of family and faith. But to Jana, it had become a place where even her thoughts weren't her own. Nebraska wasn't just a destination. It was the only place left where the Duggar name didn't carry the weight of a multi-million-dollar brand. It was only place she could finally just be Jana. But there was one final paper in that folder that made my blood run cold. It was a printed Google map with a red circle around a specific spot in the Nebraska woods. Not far from the farmhouse. Next to it, Jana had written a single question. Is this where they hid the 2015 ledgers? That's when I knew. This wasn't just a move for freedom. Jana was on a treasure hunt for the truth. And she was heading straight into a part of our family history that was never meant to be found. The sun started to peek over the horizon at 6:30 a.m. But the big house felt colder than usual. Usually, by this time, you can hear the sound of the coffee pot, the younger kids running in the halls, and Jana was always the first one up. She was the heartbeat of the morning. But that Tuesday, the house was eerily silent. I was sitting in the living room, the iPad hidden under a cushion, when I heard my father's footsteps. He came down the stairs with his usual energy, ready to start the day's meetings. He headed straight for the kitchen, expecting his coffee to be ready. When he saw the empty counter, he paused. He called out her name, Jana, his voice echoing through the high ceilings. No answer. I watched from the shadows as he walked toward her room. I saw the moment he realized her door was open. I saw the moment he stepped inside and saw the empty bed. When he came out, he wasn't the TV dad the world knows. His face was a mask of pure, unfiltered rage mixed with a frantic kind of panic. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't ask where she went. His first words were, "Where is her phone? Find her phone within 30 minutes. The house was in a state of code red. The family advisors, the men we call the gatekeepers, were already arriving. They didn't call the police. They didn't call the hospitals. Instead, they sat in the dining room with laptops open, tracking credit card pings and checking the toll booth cameras. Dad was pacing the floor, his face turning a deep shade of red. "She can't do this," he kept muttering. "She is the face of the home. We have the 2026 renewal meeting in 2 days. How do we explain an empty chair?" That was the hardest part for me to witness. To him, Jana wasn't a daughter who was hurting or a woman who needed space. She was a chair that needed to be filled for a contract. He turned to me, his eyes sharp and accusing. "Jessa, you talked to her the most. Did she say something? Did she mention Jill?" I lied. I looked my father in the eye and told him I knew nothing. It was the first time I had ever truly defied him, and the air between us felt like it was charged with electricity. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "If she's with Jill, she's dead to this family. We will lock the gates, we will change the trust, and we will tell the world she had a breakdown." I realized then that the big house wasn't a home anymore. It was a corporation under siege. And Jana? She wasn't a runaway. She was a whistleblower who had just escaped with the company's biggest secrets. As the gatekeepers started making calls to legal teams, I knew I had to get to Nebraska before they sent someone to bring her back by force. As the morning progressed, the big house felt less like a home and more like a fortress. My father had summoned his core legal and security team, the men we call the gatekeepers. These are the people the public never sees. They don't appear in the show, and they aren't mentioned in our books. Their only job is to protect the brand at any cost. I knew that if I didn't leave right then, I might not get another chance. I quietly packed a small bag, grabbed the iPad, and headed for the garage. But as I reached my car, the heavy motorized door didn't open. I pressed the remote again, nothing. The system is offline, Jessa. I spun around. Standing in the shadows of the garage was Marcus. He's been our head of security for years. A man who knows every secret buried under this property. He didn't look angry. He looked cold. He was holding a tablet that showed the live feed of every camera on the estate. Your father wants everyone to stay in the main house until we locate your sister, he said, his voice flat. For your protection, of course. Protection. I snapped, my heart hammering against my ribs. Jana is gone, Marcus. She's not kidnapped. She's not lost. She left because she couldn't breathe here. Now open the door. Marcus stepped closer, and for the first time I saw the true power of the Gatekeepers. He held up a document. It was a digital copy of the non-disclosure agreement I had signed years ago when I turned 18. If you leave this property to follow her, you are in breach of contract, he warned. The moment you cross that gate, your accounts will be frozen, your name will be removed from the show's legacy payments, and we will be forced to take legal action to protect the family's private interests. It was a cold-blooded threat. They weren't worried about my safety. They were worried I was going to join the rebellion. They knew that if Jessa Seewald, the one the fans trust, went to Nebraska, the narrative would be lost forever. I looked at Marcus, then at the camera lens staring down at me from the corner of the ceiling. I realized that my father wasn't just my father anymore. He was the CEO of a crumbling empire, and Marcus was his enforcer. You can freeze my bank account, Marcus, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. But you can't freeze the truth. Jana has the ledgers. She has the 2015 records. Do you really think a contract is going to stop what's coming? I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He hadn't known about the ledgers. That was the moment I realized Jana had more leverage than I thought. While Marcus was distracted, I didn't try the garage door again. Instead, I turned and ran toward the backwoods, toward the old trail that Grandma Mary used to use. I knew the cameras had a blind spot near the creek. As I plunged into the thick Arkansas brush, I heard Marcus shouting into his radio they were coming for me. This wasn't just a family trip anymore. It was a high-stakes escape. I had to get to my car, which I had parked a mile away at a friend's house the night before, just in case. The race to Nebraska had officially begun, and the Gatekeepers were right on my heels. By 10:00 a.m., I had made it to a safe location, a small roadside diner just across the Oklahoma border. I pulled out Jana's iPad and opened the remote access app for the big house security system. I knew Marcus and the Gatekeepers would eventually cut my access, but for now, I was still family. I had to see that footage from Tuesday 45 a.m. again. I had to know what made Jana look so terrified. I rewound the clip. There she was, hurriedly loading her trunk in the rain. But this time, I didn't look at Jana. I looked at the reflection in the glass of the greenhouse behind her. My blood turned to ice. In the reflection, you could see the second-floor balcony of the main house. A figure was standing there, perfectly still, watching Jana. It wasn't my father. The silhouette was too thin, too rigid. It was someone wearing a long coat, standing in the shadows of the eaves where the motion lights couldn't reach. I zoomed in as much as the digital grain would allow. The figure held something up to their ear. A radio or a phone. As Jana closed her trunk and looked at the camera, the figure on the balcony didn't flinch. They simply turned and walked back into the house through the master suite. Who was that? I whispered to myself. If it wasn't Dad, I and the boys were all in the guest wing that left only a few people. But the realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. That person didn't look like they were trying to stop her. They looked like they were overseeing her. I went back, even further in the footage, to 2:00 a.m. I saw the front gates of the estate swing open silently. A black SUV with no lights drove in, bypassed the main driveway, and parked behind the workshop. 2 men got out. They weren't Marcus's usual team. They were wearing suits. They met the figure from the balcony at the side entrance. This wasn't a simple runaway story anymore. Jana wasn't just escaping my father's rules. She was escaping a coordinated extraction. But who were these men? And why did the person on the balcony let them in? I started to connect the dots. The 2015 ledgers Jana mentioned in her note, the legal team visiting the house, and now a midnight meeting with unidentified men in suits. Jana wasn't just leaving for a new life. She was being moved like a piece on a chessboard. I looked at the map to Nebraska again. The red circle Jana had drawn wasn't just a destination, it was a rendezvous point. I realized that if I followed her to that farmhouse, I wasn't just going to find my sister. I was walking straight into a trap set by people much more powerful than Jim Bob Duggar. As I sat in that diner, my phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from an unknown number. It contained only 5 words, Toai ein Arcanas, Tolai E. The hair on my arms stood up. They knew where I was. They were watching the iPad's GPS. I threw the device into the back seat, slammed my coffee down, and hit the road. I didn't care about the threats or the contracts anymore. If Jana was being handled by these people, she was in more danger in Nebraska than she ever was in the big house. The drive through Kansas toward the Nebraska border is a lonely one. The roads are flat, the sky is vast, and you can see for miles in every direction. For the first 2 hours, I felt a sense of relief, like I had finally outrun the gatekeepers. But as I crossed into the open plains, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's a public highway after all. But every time I changed lanes, they changed lanes. When I slowed down to 60, they slowed down. When I pushed it to 80, they stayed exactly 200 yards behind me. It was a silver SUV. Windows tinted black, the kind of vehicle it looks like it belongs to a government fleet or a high-end security firm. My heart began to thud against my ribs. I looked at the iPad I had tossed in the back seat. I realized I had made a massive mistake. Even if I wasn't logged into the security app anymore, the device itself was a beacon. It was pinging off every cell tower along I-29, broadcasting my exact coordinates to whoever was monitoring the family's accounts. I grabbed my phone and called Jill. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. It felt like a blackout. I decided to test the shadow behind me. I took a sudden, unannounced exit into a small, dusty gas station in the middle of nowhere. The silver SUV didn't follow me into the station. Instead, I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway about a quarter-mile up and just sat there, waiting. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I realized then that they weren't trying to stop me. Not yet. They were using me. They didn't know exactly where Jana was, because Jana had traveled dark, but they knew I had the GPS coordinates from the iPad. They were letting me lead them straight to her secret sanctuary. I looked at the Valentine, Nebraska pin on the map. I was the one who was going to lead the wolves to my sister's door. I knew I had to lose them. I went into the gas station, bought a cheap prepaid burner phone, and left the iPad and my own smartphone in the bathroom, tucked behind a stack of paper towels. It was a funds 200 sacrifice, but I needed to disappear. As I pulled out of the gas station through a back dirt road exit, I didn't turn on my lights. I drove through the cornfields, my heart in my throat, watching the silver SUV stay parked on the highway, staring at a GPS signal that was no longer moving. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Jessa from the show, I was a ghost. But as I looked at the dark horizon of Nebraska ahead, I wondered if I could lose them. Who else was already out there in the dark, waiting for Jana? The silence of the Nebraska plains is heavy. After leaving my tracking devices at that gas station, I felt invisible, but I also felt completely alone. Using the prepaid burner phone I'd just bought, I dialed the Nebraska number Jana had scribbled at the bottom of her letter. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. Finally the line clicked open, but there was no hello, just the sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing and the faint whistle of wind in the background. Jana, I whispered. Jana, it's Jessa. I'm coming to you. I'm in Nebraska. There was a long pause. When the voice finally came, it was cracked and low, barely sounding like the sister I grew up with. Jessa, you shouldn't have come. You don't know what you've walked into. I know about Jill, I said quickly. Trying to keep her on the line. I know about the farmhouse and the 2015 ledgers. Jana, the gatekeepers, they're behind me. A silver SUV was tracking my GPS. I ditched them. But they're looking for you? They aren't just looking for me, Jess, she said, her voice trembling now. They're looking for the drive. The physical evidence Grandma Mary hid. Jessa, listen to me very carefully. If you see a black SUV with no plates, do not stop. Do not go to the main road. The local authorities here, they aren't who they say they are. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Jana? Where are you exactly? Well, I'm at the farmhouse, she breathed. But I'm not alone. There's someone in the woods. I can see their flashlight from the attic window. They've been circling the perimeter for an hour. Jill is trying to get a security team here from Lincoln, but the storm is cutting off the roads. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash on her end, the sound of glass shattering. Jana let out a muffled scream. Jana! Jana, what happened? I screamed into the burner phone. They're on the porch, she whispered, her voice frantic now. Jessa, if I don't make it out. The ledgers are under the floorboards of the potting shed. Tell the world. Don't let them. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in horror. The signal was gone. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires of my car screaming against the wet pavement. I was still 30 miles away from Valentine. 30 miles of empty road between me and a sister who was currently being hunted in the dark. I didn't care about the gatekeepers or the contracts anymore. I realized that this move to Nebraska wasn't just a relocation. It was a trap that had finally snapped shut, and I was the only one left who could break it open. As I sped toward Valentine, Nebraska, my mind was racing as fast as the car. Why would they go to such lengths? Why the gatekeepers, the silver SUVs, and the midnight extractions for one daughter? It didn't make sense unless there was something much bigger than family reputation at stake. During the drive, I pulled over for a split second to check a small flash drive I had swiped from the big house office along with the property deed. I plugged it into my laptop, bypassed the basic encryption, and what I found wasn't a diary or a family tree. It was a series of offshore banking ledgers under a company name I had never heard of. The Silver Leaf Trust. I started scrolling through the transactions, and my breath caught in my throat. For the last 10 years, millions of dollars from the show's earnings. Book deals and speaking engagements. Money that was supposed to be divided among us kids had been diverted. But it wasn't just sitting in a bank. It was being used to pay off settlements. I saw names of former employees, anonymous consultants, and even local Arkansas officials. But then I saw a recurring monthly payment, a massive sum, going into a private account labeled JD. Nebraska. At first, I thought, wait, has Jana been getting paid this whole time? Is she part of this? But as I looked at the withdrawal history, I realized the truth was far more sinister. Jana wasn't spending that money. The account was being used as a holding cell for funds that the family didn't want the IRS or the public to see. They were using Jana's name, the sister everyone trusted, the one who never caused trouble, as a shield for their tax evasion and hush money payments. But here was the kicker. 6 months ago, Jana had somehow gained access to this account. She had started moving the money, not to herself, but into a legal defense fund for victims of the very organization our family supported. She was draining the gatekeepers dry from the inside out. She wasn't just running away. She was bankrupting the system that had kept her prisoner. She was taking back the blood money and giving it to the people our family had hurt. I realized then why Dad was so panicked. It wasn't just that Jana was gone, it was that she had the keys to the kingdom. If she made it to that farmhouse and handed over those ledgers to the authorities in Nebraska, the entire Duggar empire wouldn't just be embarrassed, it would be in handcuffs. The silver SUV wasn't there to bring her home. It was there to make sure those ledgers, and the woman who held them, never reached the light of day. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor. I wasn't just racing to save my sister anymore, I was racing to save the only piece of justice our family had left. The rain in Nebraska didn't just fall, it attacked. It turned the dirt roads into thick, black sludge that threatened to pull my car into the ditches. By the time I saw the silhouette of the farmhouse against a flash of lightning, my hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel. This was it, the place Grandma Mary had kept for us, the sanctuary. But as I pulled into the long, winding driveway, my headlights caught something that made my stomach lurch. Jana's car was parked crookedly near the porch, the driver's side door flung wide open. The interior light of the car was casting a pale, sickly glow onto the wet gravel. I didn't see Jana, I didn't see anyone. I killed my engine and sat in the silence, the only sound being the rain drumming on my roof. I looked toward the house. The front door was standing open, swaying back and forth in the wind, hitting the frame with a rhythmic thud. Thud, thud. No lights were on inside, no welcoming glow, just a dark, yawning mouth of a house. I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight from my glove box and stepped out into the mud. The cold air bit through my jacket instantly. Jana, I yelled, but the wind swallowed my voice. I walked toward the porch, my eyes scanning the ground. Near the steps I saw it. Jana's phone. It was smashed. The screen, a spider web of glass lying in a puddle. She hadn't dropped it. It looked like it had been stepped on. I reached the front door and pushed it open further. The hinges groaned. I swept my flashlight across the living room. It was chaos. Packed boxes had been sliced open, their contents. Clothes, books, sewing supplies scattered across the floor. Someone hadn't just been looking for Jana, they had been looking for the ledgers. They had torn the place apart. Jana, if you can hear me, it's Jessa, I whispered, my voice trembling. I heard a faint sound from upstairs, a slow, deliberate creak of a floorboard. My heart stopped. I turned off my flashlight, plunging myself into total darkness. I held my breath, listening. Creak, creak. Someone was up there. And they weren't moving like someone who was scared. They were moving like someone who was waiting. I realized then that I wasn't the first person to arrive at the farmhouse. The silver SUV, the black, suited men, the gatekeepers. One of them was still inside. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold plastic of the burner phone. I had one choice: run back to the car and hope I could find help, or go up those stairs and find my sister. Looking at the wreckage of Jana's new life scattered on the floor, the fear turned into a cold, hard anger. They had taken everything from her for 36 years. They weren't taking her tonight. I gripped the flashlight like a club and began to climb the stairs, one silent step at a time, into the heart of the Nebraska dark. After the confrontation in that Nebraska attic, as the tension began to settle into a cold reality, Jana told me the one thing I never expected. I asked her how she managed to get out of the big house without the perimeter alarms going off. How did she have the key to Grandma Mary's hidden property? Jana looked at me with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "It was Mom, Jessa. It was Mom who opened the side gate." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Our mother, Michelle, who had always been the ultimate symbol of the family's unity and submissiveness, she was the one who helped Jana escape. Jana showed me a small, tattered envelope she had hidden in her boot. Inside was a handwritten note from Mom. It said, "Go now, before you become me. I have stayed for the children, but you must leave for yourself. I have deactivated the North Gate code for 15 minutes. Don't look back." In that moment, I realized the big house wasn't just a prison for us, it was a prison for her too. Mom couldn't leave. She was too deep in the branding, the contracts, and the history, but she used her last bit of power to save her oldest daughter. It changed everything I thought I knew about our family dynamic. The second shadow I saw on the balcony was an enforcer. It was Mom watching her daughter drive into freedom, knowing she might never see her again. Segment 420Z. The final ultimatum, the legal war's estimated duration, 10-12 minutes. But the peace didn't last long. By dawn the next morning, as Jana and I sat in that kitchen, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the police. It was the family's lead attorney. He didn't come with a hug. He came with a briefcase full of the final ultimatum. He sat across from us and laid out the terms. If Jana didn't return to Arkansas and sign a mental health statement claiming she had a breakdown and that her disappearance was a misunderstanding, they would file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for breach of contract and brand defamation. "We will ruin you, Jana," he said calmly. "We will take this farm, we will take your savings, and we will make sure the public sees you as an unstable woman who lost her way." I watched my sister waiting for her to break. But Jana just leaned forward. I pushed the 2015 ledgers across the table and said 4 words that ended the conversation. "I have the receipts." She told him that if they filed one single paper against her, those ledgers, which detailed every cent of hush money paid over the last decade, would be on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The room went silent. For the first time in 36 years, the Duggars' legal team had no move left to make. The predator, had finally become the prey. It's been months since that rainy night in Nebraska. The legal threats from the gatekeepers eventually went quiet. Not because they forgave Jana, but because they realized she held the power to bring the entire empire down. They chose a strategic silence over a public war. As I stand here today, looking out over the hills of Arkansas, the big house feels different. It feels smaller. The cameras are still there, the meetings still happen, but the spirit of the home is gone. Jana was the heart of this family, and when she left, she took the heartbeat with her. I recently went back to visit her in Nebraska. It's early 2026 now, and the farmhouse looks completely different. There are no cameras, no modesty rules enforced by an audience. Jana has started her own small-scale nursery, selling the very plants she used to grow in the Arkansas greenhouse. But this time, the profit belongs to her. She's breathing, she's smiling. For the first time in 36 years, she is just Jana. As for me, I returned to Arkansas, but I'm not the same person who left. I saw the ledgers. I saw the second shadow on the balcony. I know that the brand is a house of cards. People ask me why I don't leave too. My answer is simple: someone has to stay to tell the truth from the inside. Someone has to be here when the next sister decides it's time to run. The world thinks they know the Duggar family. They see the smiles, the weddings, and the babies. But now you know the story of the midnight departure. You know about the secret land grandma Mary left behind, and the mother who sacrificed her own peace to save her daughter. Jana didn't just find a new house, she found her voice. And as I drove away from her farm for the last time, I realized that the greatest Proverbs 31 woman isn't the one who stays and suffers in silence. It's the one who has the courage to walk into the dark to find the light. The story of the big house isn't over, but the story of Jana's captivity. That ended the moment she crossed the Nebraska line.